Thank you for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel pushing ahead with its new offensive against Hamas, taking control of a growing amount of territory in Gaza to give Israel more security. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on a state visit to Hungary today as the European country takes a clear position in support of the Jewish state. And we're going to hear from Jonathan Tobin of the Jewish News Syndicate about the importance of Israel's new attacks against Hamas and the risks they could carry for the remaining hostages. And a follow-up on our story yesterday as the Supreme Court hears an important case involving taxpayer funding going to the nation's largest abortion provider, Planned Parenthood. All those stories and more are ahead.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour in Israel, which is carrying out its new offensive against Hamas in Gaza in an attempt to free the remaining hostages. That comes as the Israeli Prime Minister began a state visit to Hungary today, which is showing its support for the Jewish state. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us the story. He's reporting from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu landed in Budapest Thursday for an official 4-day visit to Hungary. It's Netanyahu's first visit to Europe since the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant in November 2024 for war crimes in Gaza. Immediately after that decision, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban extended an invitation to Netanyahu and criticized the ICC's move as shameful and absurd. Shortly after Netanyahu's arrival today, Hungary announced it's pulling out from the ICC. Before his departure, Netanyahu declared Israel has switched gears in its fight against Hamas.
We are now dividing the strip and increasing the pressure step by step so that they will give us our hostages. And as long as they do not give them to us, the pressure will increase until they do. We're determined to achieve the objectives of the war, and we're acting relentlessly and with a clear line and a clear mission. And with God's help and that of our heroic soldiers, we will also achieve them.
The IDF is closing in on controlling 30% of Gaza, and Israel is moving to create large buffer zones separating the two. Israel's defense minister now says Israeli troops are out to, quote, capture extensive territory that will be added to the state of Israel's security areas. Netanyahu believes this is the best way to free the remaining hostages since Hamas has rejected yet another ceasefire proposal from Israel. The Israeli deal would see 11 hostages freed, but Hamas is only offering 4. On another diplomatic front, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is one step closer to becoming America's ambassador to Israel. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted Wednesday to advance his nomination to the full Senate for a confirmation vote. Hamas has released a corrected list of Gazans killed in the war, which shows that 72% of the fatalities are men between the ages of 13 and 55, a category that aligns with Hamas combatants. Fact checkers have for months been saying Hamas's estimates of Gazans killed in the war are inflated, and its claims that 70% of the casualties are women and children is false.
Going to continue our coverage now with Chris Mitchell joining us. So, Chris, Israel says it's close to controlling about 30% of Gaza and that it's creating buffer zones. What more can you tell us about what that means?
Well, Ephraim, it means a major shift in the war and Israel's policy. For Hamas, which is an Islamist group, territory once controlled by Islam is considered sacred and perpetually part of the Islamic world. It's part of what they call the House of Peace or Dar al-Islam, as opposed to the House of War, which is that part of the world not under the subjugation of Islam. And it's why some Muslims actually consider Spain to be part of the Islamic world. They call it Andalus. It was one part of what they call the golden age of Islam, but it was lost to the Christian world. So it was a loss for the Muslim world. So losing control, and especially land in Palestine, is very significant. For Hamas, it's not just a political, it's a theological issue. So what Israel's doing, designed to put more pressure on Hamas and hopefully and prayerfully for many people, release the hostages.
The global media has been repeating the Hamas casualty numbers since the war began. How important is it that Hamas is finally giving a more accurate assessment of what the death toll actually is?
Ephraim, it's very important, but some would say it's a little too little too little, too late. The inflated numbers began just as soon as the war began. They were put out by the Hamas Ministry of Health. They put out those numbers, and then the media sort of accepted them. They ran with them. Many governments, including the U.S. White House, ran with those numbers and just kept repeating them. They've been all part of Hamas's propaganda strategy to have more deaths, more sympathy for Gaza, for Hamas, and then to demonize Israel. Now, Israel, on the other hand, what it does to eliminate and mitigate Gazans from being in the combat zone is they send text messages, they send leaflets, all to minimize the Gazans' death. Hamas, on the other side, fights behind those very civilians to increase the death toll and then demonize Israel. But it's a welcome news, but it is kind of too little, too late, Ephraim.
The Israeli military has also been carrying out bombing missions in Syria. What's happening there?
Well, it's a very important development. It's not well publicized, I think, yet in the Western media. Israel is trying to eliminate Syrian weapons to be used by the new Syrian government, which they consider in many ways a threat to Israel. More important is actually to deter Turkey from moving into strategic military bases. And some see, actually, Ephraim, the possibility of a confrontation between Turkey and Israel. The danger there is that Turkey's a NATO member, and when one NATO member is attacked under Article 5, other NATO nations can get involved.
Is Israel also involved in a confrontation with Turkey right now?
Well, yes. Turkey's building up a really significant military presence in northern Syria. They're actually negotiating a security agreement with the new Syrian government. And one air base in particular is sort of the epicenter, I would say. It's called the T4 air base. Israel sees those moves by Turkey as a direct threat. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar expressed concerns Turkey, what it's trying to do is transform Syria into a Turkish protectorate. And then on the other hand, you have President Erdogan calling for the destruction of Israel and talking about a potential military intervention. So there seems to be something brewing between Israel and Turkey on Syrian soil.
What's the significance of Hungary pulling out of the International Criminal Court?
Well, one thing, it could actually weaken the ICC, and many other nations may question their own participation in it. It certainly signals a solidarity between Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. What it might do as well is may strain relations between Hungary and the European Union. Some would argue, perhaps, that those relations are strained already. Some countries like Belgium have expressed deep regret for what Orban is doing and seeing that as sort of weakening the ICC. But we'll see what happens. And this visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu is very significant, I think, for the relations, obviously, between Israel and Hungary, and sending a signal. And I think perhaps with President Trump in the White House, these three leaders sort of on the same page in relations to diplomacy and foreign relations.
Mike Huckabee's nomination to be U.S. ambassador to Israel is moving through the Senate. How will Israel see his confirmation when it comes to the Trump administration?
Well, I think another sign of the growing support between Israel and the Trump administration. Huckabee has a long history with Israel, also a long personal relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I would see that Governor Huckabee would be in line with the current government, and particularly in one topic, and he had been asked this in his confirmation hearings about sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty over what's called the West Bank, which is biblical Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland. And I think it just goes along with some of the major appointments by the Trump administration that have been very pro-Israel. That would include Secretary of State Marco Rubio and also National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. All these members of the Trump administration, very pro-Israel, very supportive of Prime Minister Netanyahu as well.
Thank you. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, we appreciate your insight. Look forward to seeing you in the days ahead. Coming up, more on Israel's new offensive against Hamas as Jonathan Tobin of the Jewish News Syndicate talks to CBN News about the potential gains and risks of this new strategy, particularly for the remaining hostages. We're going to hear from him when we come back. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is now acting relentlessly with a clear line and a clear mission in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces are seizing territory and establishing a second corridor as part of a military operation aimed at securing the return of hostages. On this week's episode of The Global Lane, the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, Jonathan Tobin, suggests the new Gaza strategy is risky politically and militarily, especially for the hostages.
Very difficult dilemma for Israel because it does, there is strong support within Israel, and the intention of the Israeli government as well is to do everything it can to save and get those hostages out. On the other hand, Hamas has no real intention of seriously negotiating their release without ensuring their survival as being in power in Gaza. That which presents an ongoing threat of more terrorism, more October 7th style attacks on Israel. And that just means more Israelis being put in harm's way, as well as, quite frankly, the West in general, because Hamas, it views all of the West, the United States too, as their enemies.
Well, it doesn't seem like the Palestinians want Hamas to remain in power. We saw massive protests recently against Hamas, and then we learned that 22-year-old Uday Nasser el-Rabi, who participated in those protests, was kidnapped and beaten, tortured for hours with clubs and metal rods, and stabbed to death with screwdrivers. So what more can you tell us about that, and how are the Palestinians reacting to this atrocity committed by Hamas against one of their own?
Well, it's not clear exactly where Palestinian public opinion stands right now. Hamas has retained the support of most of the people under its control, and as well as in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, because, a generation of Palestinians has been indoctrinated into the idea that their only purpose is to wage war against Israel and against Israel's existence. But their suffering in Gaza is immense. And it's clear that many Palestinians in Gaza would like not to be be living in these conditions. They want the war to end. Hamas cannot allow the war to end on any terms, but with them winning, with them holding on to hostages, with them remaining in power. That's incompatible with Israeli security and, quite frankly, with the safety of Palestinians as well. It's not clear how many Palestinians really are taking to the streets or are willing to resist Hamas. But the one thing we know for sure is that Hamas will suppress any dissent, any attempt to overthrow it from within with everything that it's got, because that's how totalitarian regimes work. That's how Islamist regimes work. That's how their patrons in Iran, the Ayatollahs, the people who run the tyrannical regime in Iran, that's how they retain power.
Well, let's talk about Iran. President Trump's making headlines in a war of words with Iran. He says there will be bombing of Iran if the Ayatollah doesn't negotiate a nuclear deal. And then the Ayatollah responded, calling for the destruction of Israel, threatening to deliver a strong blow against the U.S. So are these just wishful thinkings on the part of weakened Iran, or do they have the capability to do real harm here?
Well, one should never underestimate the ability of the world's leading state sponsor of terror to inflict some pain on the rest of the world. They're veterans at that, but they are much weakened. Their allies in their auxiliaries in Lebanon, Hezbollah, have been much weakened. The regime in Syria, which was their ally, has been taken out. The Houthis in Yemen, although they're still firing missiles, they're under fire from the West and from Israel. They're not a strong position. Moreover, they no longer have a weak government in the United States, in Washington, that seeks to appease them. President Trump has offered Iran an exit ramp, basically saying, if you negotiate a deal with us to get rid of your nuclear program, which is what, quite frankly, Barack Obama should have done back in 2015, 10 years ago, instead of appeasing Iran, then, President Trump has shown himself willing to make some sort of a deal that would allow the Ayatollahs to remain in power as long as they give up their nuclear weapons and stop being a threat to the region. That's not a price they appear willing to pay at this moment. Times have changed. They are much weakened, and it's time for them to take that into account. And if they don't, it will go hard on them.
Well, we keep hearing about sleeper cells, Iranian sleeper cells, Iranian terrorists inside the U.S. So how concerned should we be about that?
Well, we should never not be concerned. I don't know how real that threat is. I have to hope that our intelligence services in the United States are focused on that and that they are prepared. Too often our intelligence services have been focused on other things. Quite frankly, if they do something like that, they should expect the worst from the United States. So I think, I think the Iranians, despite their bluster, they understand they're dealing with, as Vice President J.D. Vance says, a new sheriff in town. I would imagine they're more likely to back down rather than to challenge the United States, now led by President Trump.
Okay, peace through strength. As always, Jonathan Tobin, Jewish News Syndicate, thank you for joining us and providing those insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Also on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Liberation Day, we're going to hear what President Trump's tariffs could mean for America's neighbor to the north, Canada. And we're going to have a look at what can be done to stop federal judges from blocking President Trump's agenda. You can see it all on The Global Lane this evening on the CBN News Channel at 8 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app or watch on YouTube. Still ahead, the Supreme Court's hearing Wednesday, which could affect whether taxpayer money could go to the nation's largest abortion provider. That's Planned Parenthood. We're going to hear the story for you, have the story for you right after this. Now for a follow-up on a story we brought you yesterday. As Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood could be on the line, the Supreme Court hearing arguments Wednesday in a case involving the abortion giant and the state of South Carolina. The question at hand, does the state have the power to determine whether Medicaid dollars can or cannot be used? CBN's Jenna Browder is at the Supreme Court with more from the hearing.
This is a case with major financial implications for Planned Parenthood, and it's one many on both sides feel strongly about. This was the scene outside the court. Hundreds of protesters standing shoulder to shoulder with their signs and worship music. Inside, lawyers making their case to justices in Medina v. Planned Parenthood, South Atlantic.
They decided that Planned Parenthood was unqualified for many reasons, chiefly because they're the nation's largest abortion provider.
The question at hand, does a state have the power to determine where Medicaid dollars can and cannot be spent? The defendants say yes, because not allowing South Carolina that authority infringes on states' rights.
The family planning provision, which comes right after the language at issue, confirms that this is a protected choice. The state, quote, shall not restrict the choice.
In its lawsuit, Planned Parenthood says patients should have the right to choose where they go for Medicaid-covered family planning services. Their list includes breast and cervical cancer screenings, birth control, and testing and treatment for STDs. It does not, however, list abortion.
Planned Parenthood is the abortion giant in the nation. While it does provide minuscule services to the effect of mammograms or ultrasounds or high blood pressure checks, we know that 80% plus of the work that it does is in the abortion industry.
Sarah Parshall-Perry with the Heritage Foundation tells CBN News all 9 justices are considered textualists, which will likely determine how they weigh this case.
So every one of them is going to look to the plain language of the Medicaid Act, something that clearly prohibits abortion and does leave to the states at their discretion determination of what constitutes a qualified provider of any medical service in the state.
And indeed, one of the biggest sticking points in court came over the word right, and if an individual has the right to choose a provider.
It would allow the regulated entity, here a state, to define the scope of the alleged right it is not allowed to violate by deciding which providers are qualified.
The Alliance Defending Freedom, representing Medina and South Carolina, arguing the word right does not apply in this case. Liberal-leaning justices pushed back.
The obligation is to ensure that individuals can choose their doctor.
Planned Parenthood is not about abortion. It's about women's health and women's health care.
I'm here because I believe that every child deserves the right to life, and we shouldn't determine based on their size, age, location, or stage whether they deserve the right to life.
A decision in this case is expected in June. If the court rules in favor of Medina and South Carolina, it could open the gate for other states to follow suit and deny Medicaid to Planned Parenthood. At the U.S. Supreme Court, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Jenna, thank you. We'll be right back with an encouraging word for your Thursday. Stay with us. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. It's time now for your Thursday Thankful. I hope you'll join me in this prayer of gratitude. God, thank you for your unfailing love. It is relentless in its pursuit of me, and it is always working for my good. To God be the glory for the things he's done, but more importantly, for who he is and what he is. He is everything I need and daily becoming everything I want. Amen and amen. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them online as well. That address is cbnnews.com. Take a moment, let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. We'll see you here tomorrow.